And for more on how Ukraine's economy is coping 2 years into its crisis, I spoke with Josh Cohen. He's a former USAID Project Officer for the former Soviet Union.
Well, it initially went through a tremendous shock, right? And it went down probably the first 2 years. Total, it's gone down almost about 20%. Things have finally stabilized, I would say bottomed out. They may even get a little growth this year, 1 or 2%. But it's a far cry from what it was. So they're definitely still hurting. And you combine the economic drop with the IMF, conditionalities and rise in energy costs.
They haven't given, the IMF has not given the promised funds to the Ukraine in about a year.
Right, it's
They're waiting on something like $1.6 billion.
Yeah, it's definitely been a while, and a lot of that has to do with, just part of it is just time, and part of it is they wanted to see how the new government in Ukraine developed, and part of it is they're waiting to see how serious Kiev attacks the corruption issue.
And you've written a lot about the corruption issue, and there's been calls from the IMF and from the United States and others to work on that issue, to be deserving of the international community's financial support. Where do they stand with respect to actually tackling that problem?
Well, they've made progress in kind of fits and starts. It's been a sort of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But the unfortunate thing is that the main drivers of the reforms are less the government in Poroshenko and more civil society, groups like Reanimation Package of Reforms and others like that are actually driving it forward. Without civil society, really nothing would happen. It would be nice to see a little more partnership, I think, between the government and civil society, and there's some of that, but it's very much driven by civil society.
One of the strengths of the Ukrainian economy used to be oil and gas, but that has been declining. Bring us up to speed on the state of their supplies, their access to that supply.
There's been some improvement, actually. Ukraine used to be very, very dependent on Russian gas supplies. They were charged exorbitant prices by Gazprom, which is basically just an arm of Putin and the Kremlin and Russian foreign policy. The Russians have leveraged that a number of times. But the good thing is, due to reforms in the European gas structure, Ukraine is much, much less dependent on Russian gas than they used to be. They're actually getting flows from Europe, back from Europe, countries like Slovakia that are really putting them in much better shape, to the point where they're actually declining Russian offers for additional gas. There is still some dependence on Russia, but it's diminished a very large amount. Part of that is just, as I said, due to the overall reforms, gas reforms in Europe, and part of it is also due to some internal Ukrainian reforms where they've bought pricing more in line with, what the market really should be. And that's actually helped them a lot. It's been very successful, that part of it.
There is, of course, this interplay between the Russian economy and the Ukrainian economy. They've been longtime neighbors.
Sure.
They used to be part of the same country. How do you describe what's going on with respect to how Ukraine is also sort of suffering under some of these Russian sanctions that the international community has levied? Yeah,
I mean, the Russians have levied their own, essentially, trade sanctions against Ukraine. It's all part of their, what I would describe as their hybrid war to control Ukraine. Ukraine's economy, just because of the close links with Russia dating back to the Soviet times, was in many ways, particularly in the more industrialized East, was very much oriented towards Russia, and those have hurt. And it's probably cost Ukraine $1 or $2 billion in exports to Russia. And that's not Ukraine's fault, though, and it's going to take them time to gradually reduce dependence on that. They have, to a certain extent, and reorient their economy towards the European Union.
And who are their most likely partners within the European Union in terms of trade to replace that dependence?
There's a wide number of them. I mean, Ukraine's strengths are, Ukraine has a lot of economic strengths. They have a very strong agriculture. They also have a very strong IT sector. It's become one of the leading IT outsourcing countries for Western countries to outsource their IT infrastructure and development to. So there's a lot of opportunities, and I think with the free trade agreement that was signed a while ago, I think between the EU and Ukraine, I think that's going to help. It's just going to gradually take some time, but I'm optimistic about that.